Welcome. This is Revolutionaries. We're starting on time today. Be very excited for us. Greetings. I am your host, M. Toussaint, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution podcast. So glad to have you guys here with us tonight for what will hopefully be an enlightening and motivating conversation about the hikikomori, the hermits of late stage capitalism. Earlier this week, we kicked it off with a discussion about breaking news regarding the passing of beloved civil rights leader and icon Harry Belafonte, and mainstream news's recently ousted twins, Fox News's Tucker Swanson McNear Carlson, and CNN's Don Lemon. So if you're enjoying what we do here and want to access the post-show champagne room, there's only one way: become a patron. For as little as $3 a month or $30 for the year, you can have access to the champagne rooms past and present and be part of the live audience of the Mau Mau Hour and join us for the always ruckus movie night. Tonight, Jason is out on assignment and taking a much needed break. We do have the one and the only man of the Mau Mau Hour, Pascal Robert.
Peace
Hello.
yes. Peace and greetings to the chat. Peace and greetings to the audience. Peace and greetings, M. Toussaint. Shout out to Jason Miles, who is not able to be on assignment today due to some tragedy that he has had to attend a service for a departed family member. So, condolences to Jason on that regard.
Mhm.
And we're looking forward to the show. Oh,
Right.
just a reminder for those who do know, tomorrow we were having our separate second episode of Frat Guy Fridays with myself and my good friend Jeff Kennedy, who will be talking about scientific racism and black fraternities and sororities.
Also wanted to add there is no champagne room tonight. I repeat, there is no champagne room for tonight. So I have a little information about our topic for tonight. Pascal, had you ever heard of this before?
You know, it's interesting because I saw the topic we have for tonight, and I had heard about this phenomenon in Japan, but
Hmm.
being referred to as, I think they call it, the quote unquote bonsai men, after the I think one of those small trees that they have in Japan that
Hmm.
they're cute. I think they call bonsai trees.
Yeah.
And I read an article several years ago that was discussing the fact that um, young men in Japan had been withdrawing from participating in Japanese society and choosing a kind of monastic, almost kind of uh, secluded life away from society. They weren't dating. A lot of the ones that were dating were doing digital dating and using like technology and whatnot. And I was like, wow, okay, this is straight. So I had been familiar with the phenomenon, but I had never heard of the terminology used by our guest in his article in Sublation on the online magazine. But I did find his article very, very fascinating, and I look forward to him extrapolating what exactly his prognostication is for this phenomenon.
For sure. So, for a bit of background, in China, we saw the term touching fish become popular. The term touching fish has since taken off in China as slang for maximizing the opportunity to do the bare minimum. The phrase is a spin on the old proverb about making the most of a crisis in order to benefit personally. Muddy waters make it easy to catch fish. So in that slang, they're saying they don't want to catch the fish; they just want to touch them. Totally understandable. From The Guardian, almost 1.5 million of people of working age in Japan are living as social recluses, according to a government study, with about a fifth of cases attributed to the pressures unleashed by the COVID-19 pandemic. Large numbers of hikikomori said they had begun retreating from mainstream society due to relationship issues after losing or leaving their jobs, the cabinet office said. A significant portion, 20.6%, said their predicament had been triggered by changes in lifestyle imposed during the pandemic. Hikikomori, classed as people who withdraw from society, spending all or almost all their isolated time at home, ac- account for 2% of the aged 15 to 62, the survey found. The Cabinet Office surveyed 30,000 people between the ages of 10 and 69 across Japan last November. The poll found that just over a fifth of respondents aged 15 to 39 had been socially isolated from 6 months to less than a year. More than 20% said they had experienced problems with interpersonal relationships, while just over 18% cited the pandemic. Among people in the 40 to 64 range, 44.5% said their behavior had been triggered by leaving their jobs, followed by 20.6 who cited the pandemic. I'm sorry, I think I read that already. Well, let's bring in our guest for tonight. Therapist in private practice, specializing in neurodivergent therapy as well as focusing on masculinity, Quique Autrey.
Well, all right.
Let me bring him in.
Yes,
There we
yes.
are.
How's it
Kiki,
going?
we don't have a soundboard today, so we'll give you some applause.
Okay, that's
Applause.
fine. I don't need the applause.
It's nice to meet you.
It's extremely nice to meet you too. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Awesome. My first question for you is
Sure.
about your name. I know it's on a lot of people's minds. Where's your name from and what does it mean?
Well, so I'm actually not sure what it means, but I'm originally from the island of Puerto Rico.
Hmm.
My family moved to the United States when I was 2, and so my my middle name is Enrique, and so Quique is like a nickname that just stuck, and so that's what I've always gone by.
Nice. Not quite
Boricua
a
in
bit
the
yet.
house.
Boricua, yes.
Right.
Boricua in the house. Respect.
We did it. We've been trying to step up our Boricua
Okay.
representation. So we got it. We got it.
Yes.
So how would you define a hikikomori? Do you see them in your private practice?
So I do to a certain degree. So there's this scholar in the Pacific Northwest in the United States, Alan Teo. I think I mentioned him in the article, and he talks about the hikikomori as being on a spectrum. And
Hmm.
so while I've never worked with someone that is completely socially isolated, and that's kind of how I understand the hikikomori, they're like shut-ins to an extreme degree. I work with men who would be shut-ins completely if their parents allowed that. But I end up working with guys who don't work, stay at home, as one author put them, they're stay-at-home sons. And
Mm.
that's meant to be a little funny, but it's actually quite tragic in some ways as well. Um, I know a lot of people like to make fun of the 40-year-old virgins. I see those guys as well. And so, yes, I would say I see a type of hikikomori, just not as
Mhm.
extreme as the ones you find in Japan and then places like Italy.
Italy.
Yeah, I don't know as much about that, but in some of the research that I did for the article, there's actually a lot of hikikomori in Italy as well. That's the other place where it's becoming a big problem. Not as severe as Japan, but I think
Mhm.
in terms of the world, it's the second place that's really struggling with it.
What do you see as being the driving factor of that in Italy?
Like I said, I didn't do as much research on Italy, but the little that I read, a lot of it was actually like post pandemic kind of stuff. And I would imagine
Mm.
it's kind of economic issues as well.
So you see these issues as being rooted in political economy?
I try not to be a reductionist. I think that's a very significant factor, if I can put it that way.
Okay. To something you want to follow your follow up question?
Sure. Um, most people in our audience would probably be more familiar with incels.
Okay.
How
Yeah.
do you contrast the two? Is one just a more extreme version of the other?
Yeah. And I've actually worked with a few incels in my private practice, who, again, a lot of the guys that I see don't want to be there. It's their parents kind of like this is like a last ditch effort kind of thing.
Hmm.
And what I would say is a big difference in my understanding of the hikikomori and the incel is that the incels tend to have a type of like anger, a deep anger toward like females. and feel slighted by females, where I don't necessarily think you see that in the hikikomori. That may be present, but that's not one of the defining features.
I see.
Do you see this? What kind of cross generational phenomenon are we talking about in terms of the range of this is happening? In terms of
Yeah, I mean that was one of the things that I was blown away by when I was doing the research. Is, I mean, you see it with adolescents, especially in Japan, all the way into 40s and 50s and even 60s, which to me was quite striking, because I'm used to seeing it from, at least in the United States, kind of the shut-ins. Some people call it a failure to launch syndrome. 16, 17 to late 30s and early 40s. I didn't realize it was going deep into the 50s and 60s.
wow, that's quite incredible. So, you're making a lot of interesting statements about comparing the way the phenomenon of what I have deemed on this show, we've talked about on the show, as a crisis of masculinity,
Yeah,
is being framed by certain media and particularly online personalities like Jordan Peterson, or some of the more conservative people we have in the political spectrum.
sure.
Can you explain to us what you view as problematic with the way in which, particularly some of those personalities, are diagnosing and prognosticating about this phenomenon?
Sure. Yeah, Pascal, I think that's a great question, and one that really needs to be kind of explored. I mean, if I can put it simply, and I guess I'll kind of pick on Jordan Peterson a little bit, only because so many of the men that I see have read his books. Some of them even start therapy with a person that kind of works on masculinity issues, because they think I'm going to be someone that's going to be really behind his thinking. And while obviously some of the things he says are kind of common sense, it can bring a type of order to clean your room, or working on self-esteem is important. I don't think anybody with common sense would disagree with those things. I think the fundamental issue that I see is that he kind of reduces what Richard Reeves calls the male malaise, or the crisis of masculinity, to kind of the individual level, or to some of these guys honestly just being lazy and not trying hard enough, or just being stuck in their parents' influence. He doesn't seem to broaden the issues to some of the political and economic and social issues that we're facing, which I think, as Michael Brooks, who wrote a book about this, points out, actually creates a lot of the male malaise, creates a lot of the masculinity issues.
So you do believe that there is a role of political economy in this?
Oh, absolutely. Very much so.
Tucson, you want to jump off with a question?
What made you make the connection between political economy and their plight? Because it's not readily apparent to a lot of people,
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Well, so part of it comes just from sort of some academic reading and interest, but then I can also speak about just my personal kind of lived experience with some of these men in my practice. I guess I'll start. I mean, on the academic level, I think there's many theory philosophers like Bifo Berardi, who explicitly connects the hikikomori phenomenon to issues in the economy, social realities that are difficult. When you just study the hikikomori, in the 1970s to the 90s, anybody that was thinking about it seriously, the psychiatrists, the psychologists, the sociologists, they were pointing to the reality that many of these men, and there were some women, but mainly men, were responding to what they called the salaryman culture, some of the economic changes of that time. So I think in the literature, it's clear that something like capitalism, and just the horrendous conditions that it results in, and just the never-ending achievement mindset of you can do more and more and more, that creates a type of exhaustion and burnout, which has led them to retreat from that sort of frenetic existence. And then in my own private practice, I can't tell you the amount of times I've had guys who are in their 20s, maybe even 30s, who look at me and said, I just never felt like I could live up to all the cultural expectations around a specific track in terms of college, and how in the hell am I going to be in all this debt and then go to a job that's going to basically, you know, rob me of my soul and my joy. And so they sort of just decide to opt out. And I'm not saying that's necessarily the right perspective or one that leads to any kind of flourishing, but I do see it rooted in kind of an economic exhaustion.
You know what's really fascinating to me about this is because there's a variety. We've talked about this several times, and there are a multiplicity of different ways we can talk about this.
Sure.
First of all, there's a phenomenon that we have on the show, a thesis, if you will. We
Sure.
call it the 50-plus year counter-revolution. Short version, 50-plus year counter-revolution is based on the idea that from the end of the New Left in the 1960s, like from 1968 up until today, the politics and general direction of global management in the world has gone in a rightward shift as a counter-revolution against all of the more left radical politics of the 60s, right? One of the actual linchpins that takes place that transforms the social mechanisms of American society and Western society in the 60s beyond just simply racial inclusion vis-a-vis civil rights is second wave feminism, right? Now, one of the phenomenon that I see often discussed by people on the right, particularly the more hyper-reactionary manosphere types,
Sure.
is that these phenomena are a consequence of men being displaced in the workplace by the presence of women, or being displaced in their culturally expected normative behavior as patriarch in society because of the shift away and the movement towards the quote unquote modern woman.
Sure.
This is like catnip in the manosphere. The modern woman, the modern woman. Right? Now, I don't think anyone who's intellectually honest will deny that there have been significant societal shifts in the functionality of the genders in the workplace, political economy, rise of divorce and all that. But again, that's rooted in the assumption that the only way to have a functioning society in the Western world is if women don't have choices.
Right, which is insane.
Right?
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah. Oh gosh.
Right? And part of the problem I have with the discourse that comes largely from the manosphere and the right is they never say that part. Is that what they're basically saying is that the collapse of society and the role of the man that leads to the phenomenon of the quote-unquote hikikomori men is directly correlated to the fact that women were given choices.
Yeah. I think that's ludicrous.
Because I know you're gonna be like, well, what's the question? The question I'm getting to at is that why is it so difficult for us to understand that perhaps the problem is the way in which amongst and within the confines of post-industrial and post-digital capitalism, what we expect to be the normative function of the genders not only is problematic now, but it always has been problematic within the confines of Western society and civilization. If you want to, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Do you mind just asking one more, just kind of like distilling it a little bit more?
Why aren't we challenging the way we've always viewed the concept of gender roles in the first place?
Yeah. I mean, I think in some ways, I think I see a lot of people, you know, more on the left, obviously challenging, you know, gender essentialism and all these roles. Isn't it part of the right to have that nostalgic connection to the past and the way things were and should be? That's kind of what I see is this obsession, almost this idolatry of a certain type of, you know, patriarchal masculinity is, I think, a failed attempt to have that kind of nostalgic connection to the past where things were better, but it's an illusion.
Well, first of all, number one, that's the essence of the word reactionary.
Sure.
The definition of reactionary is to believe that everything in the past was better. And I think
Right.
if you look at the quality of life statistics, the demographics, and the actual life expectancy, health statistics, besides the New Deal, everything before that, men were not exactly doing so well. And men to this day have higher rates of suicide,
Yes.
die younger.
We are not doing well.
They have never lived and done better than women, quite frankly. But Tucson, I feel like I'm dominating here. As a woman, quite frankly, I'm glad that you're here to hear this. I'd like to hear your reaction to some of the stuff I was saying.
I mean, I think it's interesting. I think you're right that our gender roles in the West should have been examined all along. There were definitely problems before 1950s. Definitely problems during the 1950s, this era that people seem to really want to go back to. There's a trend away from the girl boss into this trad wife, stay at
Mm.
home wife sort of thing. And I didn't think, as popular as the girl boss was, I didn't think I would ever see that trope go on the downtrend for a trad wife of all things. I mean, Desperate Housewives was like a comedy. You know,
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
were not supposed to be women you wanted to be like.
Well, the thing is, what is fascinating that you say that is that I actually think that the trad wife option is the female version of the hikikomori men, in that her way of opting out is just get married and be a housewife.
Mm.
What I'm trying to say is that, I'm really glad you brought up the rise, and I've seen literature on it, the rise of the trad wife phenomenon. Is that I think that everyone, regardless of gender, are tired of the way capitalism and society is structured.
Yes. I think we're exhausted.
All right.
Mhm.
I think that because the cost of entry into functionality for men, the opportunity cost is higher in a certain sense. And forgive me, women, because women are like, what do you mean the opportunity cost is higher? In that, the opportunity cost is higher is that because of the norms of performative masculinity, certain performative behaviors require more economic output from men. You got to pay for dates. You got to be able to have the security to support your woman, your wife, your kids, etc. So and so. So the traditional belief of what is required to launch economically, the barrier of entry for men was a little higher. It was a lot higher because traditionally for women, there was not much of an economic barrier entry. It was simply participate as the quote unquote trad wife, and that was it, right? So then we move into the post second wave feminist society where you have now both men and women are in the workforce. Deindustrialization is taking working class men out. They have less options. Women are entering the force and they're doing well. The rise of neoliberalism and technology is grounding them all to dust. People are doing more work, more productive for less wages, compared to inflation and a rate of return. And what happens is that men are pulling out by just opting out. Why? Because the opportunity cost of them participating was always traditionally higher in their mind.
Mm.
And now with the trad wife, women are opting out not by saying, quote unquote, I don't want to participate in society, but I'm just going to be like, hey, I'm opting out by back to the trad wife and finding a husband who can flip the bill. So I'm asking you as the expert, are these both different types of ways that are a gendered response to the nature of capitalism where both people are just pulling out? and because women are going to the trad wife option, and men don't have the opportunity costs to transition in, they're reverting to just becoming hermits.
Yeah, no, I think I don't know if I could say it any better. I could speak less to the trad wife, but that's a really interesting idea. But for sure, on the masculinity side, I think you're spot on. I would agree with your assessment. You
I
know, I
think.
mean,
Two
Go
separate.
ahead. Well, I think for the trad wife option, if that's an option that you would like to take as a woman, there's startup costs, there's startup work, because the actual work of a trad wife is perfection. So
mm,
you have to look perfect, you have to be perfect. Once you finally get that husband, you have to be a perfect wife, you have to be a perfect mother and have a perfect house. All those things have to be perfect, and it's never ending. It's very neurotic.
yes,
And there's no real way to win or be happy in that either. So I just wanted to add that.
yeah,
No,
no,
I'm not saying the trad wife is an easier state option for the women either.
Sure, I just wanted to say that.
You got to right. I think and I agree with you, and that's a very good perspective. The trad wife has opportunity costs too. They might not be money, but it's behavior and aesthetics and expectations.
Aesthetics cost also.
Aesthetics have costs too. You got
mm.
makeup and all that other stuff is important.
Yeah, you know, in the literature around masculinity, they have this concept of precarious manhood, which is the idea that, you know, masculinity in the kind of the toxic forms is almost this impossible ideal that a man constantly has to try to pursue and, you know, can lose it so quickly. I wonder if there's a type of precarious femininity in terms of the trad wife, that it's this constant, never-ending performance that, you know, one can never really meet. And I wonder if that's also kind of caught up in like the capitalist myth of constant pursuit of the next best thing.
My first thought is hair.
Mm,
Hair removal. That is a very easy way to fall out of being seen as feminine. You have to
right.
constantly do hair removal, unless you can get it permanently removed, which is not in reach for a lot of people for a lot of reasons, not just money. But it is a constant cycle that you have to be on, and some women have hormonal issues, and they can't really control it. But that will slide you out of being seen as feminine very quickly.
Mm,
For a man, it's like he might eat a salad. Boom, you're not masculine anymore.
mm.
But if a woman shows up with hair in the wrong places, then
You're talking about particularly like facial hair.
particularly facial hair, but also body hair. Also body hair. I mean, it's still a treadmill that you're on. No one gets to really have a safe identity in this.
Well, yeah, I
Right.
mean, I think that definitely that the those kind of things are. I mean, listen, the aesthetic standards, regardless of how much we've evolved, the aesthetic standards put on a woman to become quote unquote attractive in this gendered world are ridiculous compared to men. I mean, like basically, you know, pretty much, you know, if you're a man and you have confidence and you have some level of capital, your your capacity to find a mate or a spouse is unlimited. If you're a woman, even if you have capital and confidence, if you aesthetically don't look a certain way, it just drops.
Mm. Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
Hmm. It's rough out there.
you know.
Now,
So
can
Mhm.
I throw out another thing too? I mean, this is just, I get, if we can, going back to the hikikomori, I didn't highlight this in the article, and this just goes to show how women carry things that, you know, aren't often talked about. One of the things that I think is quite tragic about the hikikomori phenomenon is that it's oftentimes the mothers that are supporting them and having to work extra hours to, at one level, make sure that they can maintain this lifestyle of, you know, disengaging from the social world, which I'm conflicted about, because on the one hand, I understand why they're opting out given like the capitalist pressure, but it's tragic to me that the mothers have to work so hard to allow that to happen. Do you
well, I
guys
mean,
have any
I
thoughts
would
on
make
that?
I mean, I would like my larger position on all of this, number one, is that this is all fundamentally rooted in the con game of believing that people have to be working for anyone else in the first place, and that we can't find alternative ways to provide for the quality of life in a society when the thing we are all fighting to get, which is called money, is a complete illusion and has no intrinsic value. You can't eat it. You can't build a house with it. It won't make you warm when it's cold. It's not going to cure you of a disease. It's completely an illusion of ascribed value and socially constructed that people have been using throughout time to create hierarchies of status, right? So the ultimate first stage for me is to collapse that con game, all right? So once you collapse that con game, the question becomes, in a post-industrial, post-digital society, what are the mechanisms we have to maintain the functionality of society that gives the options of human beings who want to work for others in a traditional capacity to do so, or if not, find ways of living a quality of life where their contributions can be based on the way we socialize people to contribute. Because my position is that the concept of contributing to society is rooted in the ideological superstructure of society. What does that mean? It's a fancy leftist word for the media, education, socialization, all of the way in which you're socialized dictates what you believe, quote unquote, being productive is.
Right.
And being productive in a Western society rooted in political economy of capitalism is about making money that goes upwards to a small percentage of people that makes you think you're living well when you don't realize that you're living well is like living like a cockroach compared to the people at the top.
Yeah.
So if we really want to be quite honest or maybe radical about it, we should start by talking about how we can collapse these hierarchies, maintain a functioning society, and have quality of lives where our expectations of productivity are not based on simple greed and aggrandizement, but perhaps what if we lived in a society where productivity would be based on how much you can contribute to making life better and more quality and comfortable for as many people as possible.
Gay space luxury communism now.
No, it doesn't have any space luxury communism.
We got to get something.
Can I ask you guys a question?
Sure.
And I'm gonna, if I can, just take it back to why I think someone like Jordan Peterson at least is very popular in the population that I work with, and just kind of see what you guys think. You know, if there's one thing that he is addressing, and there's been some very leftist critiques of Jordan Peterson that have given him this like point, he is sort of addressing that existential level of the soul, of meaning, of purpose. And you know, a lot of guys feel adrift. Now, I would argue a lot of that is because of the economic realities they're in, which he doesn't acknowledge. But is there a place in the vision that you guys are talking about where we can address the existential parts of life, human connection, meaning, purpose? I would love for you guys to talk to that if you can.
I see. This is what I'm saying. I'm not denying that human beings live in a state of need for existential purpose.
Okay.
What I'm saying is that the problem we have had in the world, I would make the argument for over 500 years, is because what is considered to be the normative driver of the existential purpose has been perverted to maintain a hierarchy of extraction for various manifestations of elites, while the peasants, paupers, slaves, and workers, you know, drone on till they die. I want to be very, very transparent. I'm going to give some narratives. I know someone who worked their whole life hard, was a professional, worked in the medical profession. Wife was a professional as well. Had a nice house, nice quality of life, sent the kids to college, 2 kids, they did well, everything was well. They were considered high in their society. They were of retirement age, and they look back on life, everything is fine.
Mm.
The man suffered from Alzheimer's. The wife had a stroke. The kids had to put them in the senior citizen center, sell all of their property, and now these people who dedicated all of their lives to all of this accumulation of stuff are simply sitting in a room waiting to die.
Mm. That's terrible.
Yeah. It's profound.
I have another example. Younger person in his 50s, worked years in the human services industry, had kids, sent them to college, got married, retired a little bit early because of a health issue, transplanted to a different location, enjoying his retirement, worked hard his whole life, had all kind of plans, contributed to society, family man, had 2 strokes, had to move back in with his senior citizen mother, sell his house.
Mm.
Not even 55 years old. What does it mean to spend all this time chasing this crap in this system of hierarchy that is extracting for people on the uppers, producing your kids, having your kids go to college, or I have my kids, when not even in your senior years, one little medical condition, bap, you're out. Or even in your senior years, one little medical condition, bap, you're vegetabilized. What does all that time look like then?
I think that's something that a lot of younger people are reacting to. They don't see the end as being worth it. They've
Mm.
seen it play out with their parents, with their grandparents. They know there's no gold watch after 50 years. There is no 50 years at a company anymore. There's sometimes not even 2 years at a company anymore. And I think these are manifestations of despair when you see where things are going, where things have been going and where they will be by the time you are a certain age.
Let me tell you right now, I'm gonna keep it funky monkey for this podcast. Funky monkey. There are many people who would call me a hikikomori man.
Mm.
I'm 55 years old. I rent a property that my mom owns. She has another one. I have a disability. I haven't worked traditionally in several years. I had my own law practice. I'm not practicing now. I don't have my license. I'm not married. I don't have kids. I work from home. I'm happier now than any day of my life that I was trudging my ass to that goddamn law office, working for those goddamn clients, busting my balls. If I could assure I could find a way to subsidize this and live comfortably and not have to worry about debt, I'd do this for the rest of my goddamn life.
I think Kike mentioned also in his article that hikikomori is a spectrum.
Yeah,
There are
absolutely.
some very severe cases and some people that are probably in our lives. Can you speak to that? At what point does this person seek help, or does someone seek help for them? How far
Yeah.
gone are they usually?
Sure, sure. No, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. I mean, in my experience, I would say they tend not to seek help themselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's, you know, and for many of them, they are living with family members. So I think it's, I don't know if it's the right way to put it, that it's the family's responsibility to do it, but I think I would encourage, whether it's the mom or dad or sibling or grandparent, whoever they live with, to, yeah, take stock on how much they're participating, at least just with friendships. Are they in their room, you know, for more than 8 hours a day? I don't want to put like a real specific number on it, but
Mm-hmm.
I think it is kind of the family that takes the first step to get them some type of help. And I'm biased as a psychotherapist. I think giving them a safe space where they can begin to make some of the connections as to why they're feeling the way they're feeling can be important.
Mm-hmm.
But there may be other ways, there may be support groups, or you know, I have found, so I work with a lot of men diagnosed, you know, on the autism spectrum, who have a very difficult time socializing in person. But you know, they do a lot of online communication, like healthy online communication on Discord, through
Mm-hmm.
like D&D groups. There's all kinds of ways that people can connect online. I don't believe anyone has to socialize in any particular way. I think it's just important to have that sort of human contact, whether that's digital or in person.
I appreciate that.
Yeah,
Yeah, a lot of people are very down on online communication, but some of those friendships can be very intense and real.
absolutely. Yes. Yes. So, you know, and again, just the guys that I tend to work with, they would say that their closest friends are online. And I don't judge that one bit. I celebrate that. If that's how they find their community, then more power to them.
By the way, I want to shout out. I'm going to keep it funkier and funkier.
I like it, man.
The goat of Hikikomori men is my uncle Ulrich.
Mm,
Ulrich is 78 years old. Used to work. He has a degree in architecture from a university in Canada. Left Haiti in the early 70s. Came to the United States because of he worked at a chemical plant in the early 80s and had a bad burn incident and could not work, and basically had been on disability. Had never been to work since then. Been on disability and, you know, took care of himself.
Mm.
Had businesses. He literally started a Haitian pickles business where he's making pickles and selling it as a business.
Wow.
wow. That's amazing.
Probably one of the 5 most brilliant people I've known my whole life.
Sure.
Never
That's
been married.
common among the Hikikomori, isn't it? That's common.
Oh, I think so. Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to me, it has nothing to do with intelligence. You know, many of the guys that I work with are brilliant. Here's the thing, right? I mean, again, just to go back to Jordan Peterson, I know I'm mentioning him a lot just because, you know, he's sort of the figure that we can explore. But I think he would say that the Hikikomori are being antisocial. They're choosing not to, you know, explore existential meaning by just staying in their room and disconnecting from society. But I think a lot of Hikikomori would say, no, we're finding our existential meaning by choosing to opt out of the frenzy, Pascal, that you've been talking about, the bullshit
Let
that
me
you've
tell
been
you
exploring.
something. This is a funny thing, right? This is a funny thing. I'm gonna tell you. I'm gonna keep it funky monkey with you guys.
I'm gonna start using that phrase, man. I'm gonna start using it in therapy. I appreciate that.
When I was 6 years old, after, like, you know, we had just come from visiting my father's family and whatnot, and, you know, my uncle Ulrich had always lived in the family house. Like, my grandmother had a house in Queens, and he always lived in the house. He had kind of like an apartment in the basement and whatnot. And, you know, my father had 8 siblings. They all the men were married. They had kids and blah, 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 so on and so forth, et cetera, so on and so forth, right? So we go to my house. I'm 6 years old. And I'm saying to my dad, I said to my dad, I said, I really like Ulrich. And my father's like, why? Because Ulrich is like, in my family, he's like Uncle Fester. He's literally like,
Yeah.
First of all, let me tell you about my uncle, man. This guy, he's going to be pissed off that I'm even talking about him. Ulrich is very much into like metaphysical cosmology and like, you know, books on magic, secret societies.
Sure,
And
the esoteric.
yeah, he's an esoteric. He's very
Yeah.
much into the esoteric. Like I tell people all the time, when I go into Ulrich's room, I'm afraid of his books. I don't like the energy they give off. I'm like, I don't like the energy this guy has in his books. Like I was like, you know, he's into all like I see his computer. He has like the Kabbalah, he has Sufism, he's got like Zoroastrian, he's got all kinds of like all this like esoteric, just you know, bim bambo spambo. I mean, like you know, zim scam scabbly boo. Like I mean, there's all of it.
All kinds of shit.
Yeah.
I talked to the cat the other day. He told me that he has 2005 books on his freaking digital hard drive.
Wow. Well, and you know, that is the thing with the hikikomori too, right? They spend a lot of their time reading manga in their rooms. You know, they are connecting to larger cultural realities. You know, I think we have to move away from the idea that they're being lazy or selfish or whatever. I think it's an alternative way to be human is maybe one way I think about it. You know, in the article I talk about, you know, if capitalism produces that alienation, maybe we have to think of different forms of autonomy where you're getting to construct your identity. Maybe they go too far by not having any social contact, but maybe we can think of ways to have healthy social contact.
Oh, this is the thing though. Let me tell you something. Ulrich never liked, you know, every weekend, my uncle Ulrich would have different generations of young Haitian guys come to the house, we play cards, get the booze, and he's basically like the old man. He's like the old man of the young Haitian mafia. And they're like, yo, Don Ulrich Corleone, what's going on? And then he's just like, you know, just giving like stories or whatever. No, it's. Let me tell you something about. Ulrich is one of my favorite uncles. Let me tell you something about it. First of all, every time I call him, you know, there's this thing with Haitian men are obsessed with military culture. It comes to the Haitian Revolution. So every time I call Ulrich, the first thing I say, Ulrich General. He's like, Colonel. How are you? It's like a rich every time. I'm like, Ulrich General. He's like, Colonel. You know, it's just a thing.
Yeah.
So he's always kind of been my partner in crime in terms of politics and my writing, and I share my thoughts and ideas with him and so on and so forth. So he's always been like for years, my intellectual thoroughfare to like, you know, discuss things, talk about the world. The guy is brilliant. And what's funny is that I look at all of his male siblings, the ones that got married, the ones that had kids, almost literally, except for the one that's younger than him, they're all dead, including my father. All three of them died before they were 60 years old.
How do you make sense of that?
Well, the thing is fascinating, right, is that the stress of life helped kill these men. Helped kill them. They were new immigrants to the United States. They left the era of Papa Doc in Haiti. The trauma of that era was bad enough. Coming to the United States, working and buying a house, sending your kids to school, dealing with issues like race, dealing with issues of being a foreigner, dealing with issues of like what's going on. We're dealing with my wife has to work now. When I was back home, I used to have, you know, a maid. Last time I lived so well, I had all that status. Now I come here and I got to deal with this cracker boss in my ear every day. I never had to deal with these crackers when I was back home. They're dealing with that for 80 years, for every day, for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. I watched some of these men drink themselves to death. In front of my own eyes.
I'm very sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
So when I saw this subject matter today, I was like, "Oh, this is going to be good." I got a lot to say about this.
Mm.
Kike, do you know if there's a biological component to this?
You know, I'm not 100% sure, but one thing that has been explored, which, some would argue is biological, is many of the hikikomori are likely on the autism spectrum.
Mm,
And so that would be kind of the link that maybe could be made. Again, it's one of those things. Not all are, but I think many believe that many are, probably diagnosed with ASD or autism spectrum disorder. So
mhm,
and that's one thing that I would say too, for those men that I work with that are both hikikomori and autistic. They look at me and they say, I just don't feel like I belong in this world, in this society, the way that it's built, the way that it's established. And some of that's economic and educational, but some of it's just, the way people communicate and the way people relate to each other. So that's where I have a lot of compassion for the hikikomori. I think in some ways they can't stand the noise. They can't stand,
mm,
the way things are, and this is one of the only ways they know how to exist. And so I think we have to have some level of compassion.
for sure. For sure.
I'm quite frankly, I think there are a lot of these guys. There's nothing defective with them about at all. Is that they realize the con and they're trying to find another way to hustle.
I like that. I like that. I know I'm kind of torn. I think I would still kind of sign off on what I said, but at the same time, I can actually agree with you 100% too. Like I think it's their way to give the middle finger to the system and say, "Fuck you, I'm doing my own thing."
It's funny. There was a Andy Williams in the chat, and so he was saying, Pascal, every Haitian has an Uncle Ulrich. What's funny is that
Mm,
everyone in the Caribbean has an Uncle Ulrich. That phenomenon, I found to some of my friends from like Barbados, from Jamaica. He was like, "Yeah, man, we got Jamaican Uncle Festus. That shit is in the Caribbean. Everyone got an uncle like that, man."
Oh yeah. So I saw that someone like chatted, can you be a hikikomori in a relationship? And I think that's a really good question. Like I was actually thinking, Pascal, one of the things that seemed really exciting and interesting about the examples you were giving of like your uncle and others was that they still found a way to stay related to others in some vibrant ways. And
mm,
I don't know exactly how to promote that with some of the hikikomori that I work with and that I've read about that are very extreme, but maybe that's a part of the work is to envision a future where we can have a type of hikikomori that's still related to others. Because I do think there's something to being in relationship, whatever that looks like. That's good for the soul. That's good for the psyche.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And by the way, I'm not saying that everyone should opt out or blah blah blah, so
Sure,
on and so forth.
I'm not either.
My argument is that we all should be working to flip the paradigm.
Yes,
right. For ourselves and others.
No one
yes,
else should be having three uncles and one of them being their father, dead before they're 60, ground to dust in the working machines of American capitalism.
right. Amen.
Totally agree.
So definitely the game has got to change.
Mm.
Well, I think we've helped to establish that it is a spectrum, and there are it's more common than we know.
Yes, and it's not all incels or these men that are just really angry at women or school shooters, potential school shooters.
Mhm.
There are these nonviolent, very gentle, loving, whatever men who, as I think Pascal has said, are just exhausted and actually figuring out ways to creatively opt out of, yeah, frenetic capitalism.
What led you to your interest in masculinity in your work?
Well, a lot of things, my own journey in therapy, struggling with my own, construction of masculinity coming from the Caribbean and Latin America. There's something called machismo, which
Mhm.
is like, I always say it's like toxic masculinity on steroids.
Mhm.
And I never felt like I was, the model of, a guy who, embodied machismo. And so I really wrestled with kind of my gender identity and then, went into kind of a deep therapy process to kind of work some of that out. And then around the same time, I got linked up with a private school that served young men on the autism spectrum, many of them that I'm still connected with, that some are hikikomori. And that's kind of how I got into all this.
Wow.
And I myself, I wouldn't identify as a hikikomori, but I definitely resonate with their stance and can appreciate their courage in some ways.
What would you say to a person who thinks they might be hikikomori or thinks they might know someone who is?
Yeah, no, I would say on the one hand, it's okay, and you can kind of accept that and embrace that. My only, as we've been talking about, my only maybe challenge or call is whether that's in therapy or in a support group or an online community. Find places where you can just have conversations and talk. I'm real big on the importance of, yeah, kind of just talking about what's going on, both internally and externally. And so whether that's family or friends or therapy, be a hikikomori, but try to stay connected if possible, in ways that actually serve your soul rather than, yeah, create further alienation.
Well said. Would you like to add anything to that, Pascal?
Nah, man. Yo, man. We should get t-shirts. Hikikomoris are us, man. Start a forum.
I'm down, man. Just let me know.
Gun ranges and whatnot. Go fishing. The whole nine. Yo, we should start a
Absolutely.
business. The Hikikomori hustle. You know what I'm saying?
Spell hustle with a $sign.
Whatever. Make it happen. Fight the Jordan Peterson paradigm.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
Because I think he does. I don't know that he's ever used that word, but I think he does.
Yo, let me listen. Let me keep it 100. Jordan Peterson doesn't give a goddamn about these young men. Jordan Peterson is worried about the fact that this piece of crap capitalist system that has provided for the quality of life of white boys that look like him is falling apart because the birth rate in this country is shrinking because people aren't getting married anymore to create the labor to have the wealth extracted by the 1%. And he realizes that we've got to get these young boys out to work like they did back in the day, or else this system is going down while I'm living in my socialist haven in Canada. He's full of crap. Look at the birth rates in France. There's a video on YouTube about what's going on in France. The reason why their Social Security is going bankrupt is because their birth rates are going down and they don't have enough workers to replace it. All these anti-immigrant morons who think immigrants are the problem, they're lying. You know why? They're scared because the populations domestically in America and the West are not rebirthing enough to provide labor, and they realize they need immigrants to be the new jobs, and people are afraid it's going to change the context of America. And the racism of these Western countries is what's denying them from admitting the fact that they are denying themselves replenishing, and they need these black and brown people. It scares them because they're terrified of genetic annihilation. That's what's going on. Don't be these stupid right-wing morons. Oh, yeah, be a man. You stupid prick. They're using you.
Is there anything, Quique, that we didn't cover that you feel like we should know?
No, not at all. And this is definitely not, because I really resonate, Pascal, with what you said. I think the only thing I would say is, since I do work with a lot of men, and gosh, man, I feel like in some ways masculinity has a horrible rap, and it should for all of its history.
I think just go that far. I don't think there's nothing wrong with being a man and being masculine.
Sure.
It's the paradigm of masculinity we've had.
That's right. No, and so I guess what I would want to end on is just, not just for the hikikomori, but let's have compassion on men while still holding them accountable.
No
Okay.
doubt.
Sounds like where we need to wrap up.
Awesome. Hey, thank y'all so much for having me on. It was great.
Yeah,
No
thanks for being
problem,
here.
man.
This was awesome. Hope to have you on again.
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right. So, and with that, this is Revolution, and we are
Out.